We love Elijah, but we like Bella. No? Okay. Good morning. So I need Kava to Photoshop somehow me and Daniel Swivl in a picture, because this morning. Yeah, sometime I don't know, help me. So I'm humbly keeping his seat warm, sitting in the space of my beloved teacher, Rabbi Daniel Swivl, who asked me to present this panel. It was after my smicha here in 2009 that both Reb Zalman and Reb Daniel invited me to teach to incoming students Introduction to Jewish Renewal and the thought of Reb Zalman, so I'm presuming that's why he had me to keep his seat warm. Of course, Reb Daniel was Reb Zalman's first musmach. He co-authored, along with Reb Zalman, the book, many things, but Integral Halacha, which of course is the subject of this morning's talks. He teaches all of the rabbinic smicha students about Integral Halacha, and of course supervises their final teshuvah projects. He is now the founding director of what is known as the Integral Halacha Institute, General Macher, and go-to guide in this area within Renewal. The Integral Halacha Institute, which is relatively new, has emerged from the Aleph Beit Midrash. It is under the auspices of Aleph Canada and oversees all of the Integral Halacha, Integral Halacha activities. Of course, and on the website of the Integral Halacha Institute, I think it's his personal website, where the Introduction to Integral Halacha includes the works Ensouling the World, Spiritual Teachings on Shabbat, Shemitah, and Climate Change, and he's working on the Ger Toshav piece and others. Of course, Reb Daniel is also a beloved friend and colleague, and we trust that he will be back in this seat next year. Yes. I still like that Photoshop thing, though.
We'll make it happen.
It could be two-headed.
So we all sang, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. And many of us understand that we serve God with the heart. And we lead with the heart. And I wouldn't argue with that. But in keeping with Reb Zalman's analogy of the body as the world, we know that the heart cannot survive without being grounded in the body. And Judaism is grounded in a textual tradition and a stream of interpretations and practices that follow and build on one another. This is our body. Reb Zalman was always afraid and always spoke about. He always reminded us at every al-hala and at every meeting that we were never to be severed from our halachic traditions. We were never to be severed in function, if not in form. It was our rear view mirror, right? It was the older operating system with which we needed to stay compatible. Thank you, that's the word I'm looking for. And he made Reb Daniel promise that all of the rabbinic talmidim knew and respected this halachic process of how we work out Jewish questions and issues while acknowledging that we live in a new world and a new paradigm. And thus, our final teshuvah projects were born for our Aleph Rabbinic Smicha students as a way of integrating how Reb Zalman's paradigm shift radically challenges and expands the halachic process. This process begins with recognizing that there is not and never was such a thing as the halacha. The halacha that is a static, set in stone Jewish playbook. Rather, there's a halachic process. Halacha itself is a conversation, not a set of decisions, but a conversation. And there are multiple halachot, as Reb Daniel writes, that after careful study, rabbis may reach. Jews may reach. And many positions are possible and coexist, but it's never static. And through this process, we affirm what Reb Zalman always taught us, that renewal doesn't pop out of nowhere. Everything that we do is firmly planted and part of this beautiful stream that is the ancient traditions of Judaism. And that we may broaden that stream. And that's what we do, it's broad. But we are not simply a parallel river. We can't think of ourselves in that way. So our halachic stream broadens to include additional, new, and important criteria into the halachic conversation. And we do this in order to reach a destination that has integrity with Kedusha, holiness, which is, after all, God's will and our highest aspiration. So our aspirations become the ability to see our tradition through the prism of expansive light, the expansive light of paradigm shift, which of course includes, but isn't limited to, ecology, psychology, Shekhinah consciousness, gender equality, science, just to name a few, on top of those that we have held and embraced for so many centuries. And because it is that expansive light that allows the wisdom which is the core at the essence of our tradition to warm and illuminate our dark, aching corners of ourselves and our world. And by doing so, we live in a way which is consistent with our Jewish place in God's glorious design, the way our system of Torah was originally designed to light our way. 4 years ago, the Ohala Program Committee inaugurated an annual Halacha Panel at our conference. And starting with the second of these panels, we began to ask rabbis who had been students in our rabbinic program to present the tshuvot, which were their final projects in the area of rabbinic texts. Each year, now entering into our fourth, we have edited and presented 3 of these tshuvot, as we also begin to gather them for more public distribution, a little bit more of that at the end of our presentations. This year's 3 presentations are perfectly suited for the deep ecumenism theme of our conference this year. So each of our rabbis will present for 15 minutes. Immediately following, we will break out into 30-minute follow-up sessions on the topic of your choice among the 3. More details on that later. One note before I introduce the panelists and our topics for today. These are just a digest of our panelists' greater work. They have worked really, really hard to bring it down to 15 minutes. But hopefully you are interested in more of the detail and reading the full teshuvah, and if that is the case, then please approach the authors directly. They would be glad to share them. You should also know that there's a project underway between Reb Daniel and Rabbi Rachel Barenblatt that will group all of these teshuvot by subject matter and distribute it in some way. The resources of this are currently available and found on the Aleph Canada website. And almost everything is available on digital download. The books are also available on the Aleph Canada website and priced in Canadian dollars. So get it while the exchange rate is good. So today we are blessed to have as our panelists Rabbi Ori Har and Rabbi Belta Bogard and Rabbi Richard Backer. First, Rabbi Ori Har is a mashpia ruchanit, sage-ing mentor, and rabbi ordained by Aleph, the Alliance for Jewish Renewal. She co-founded and directs the Conscious Learning Community Center for Spiritual Friendship in Boulder. She serves as a spiritual director for individuals and groups, as well as leading saging workshops. Reb Ori is also a practitioner of Mando Zen, embodied Torah and devotional dance, and is on the faculty of the Embodying Spirit training program. Ori has been an adult educator of Biblical Hebrew, Torah, and meditation for over 20 years, and is the author of God Speaks Here and Now, a guide for living. a native Israeli, now living in Boulder, Colorado, where Ori is married, has 2 children, 2 stepchildren, and is savta of 2 grandchildren. Today, yay, Ori will offer the halachic process, including and transcending the concept of avodah zarah. Yay, Ori. Thank you. Following Ori, we have Rabbi Bella Bogart, yay. Recently retired from over 30 years of congregational life, serving as a chazan, educator, and finally rabbi. She's released 5 CDs of original music and is currently working on a chant project inspired by Reb Zalman's practice of davening in English as well as in Hebrew. Today, Bella will offer Can a Shaliach Tzibor Face a Cross in a rented church space. And finally, we have Rabbi Richard Backer of Newton, Massachusetts, who was Aleph ordained and is currently serving as the interfaith chaplain at Winchester Hospital, rabbi and Jewish chaplain at Leahy Hospital and Medical Center, and the Hillel director at Babson College. After a career in law and real estate investment, Rabbi Backer has functioned as a hospice and hospital chaplain and is board certified through the National Association of Jewish Chaplains. Richard will offer Considering Our Tzedakah Obligations, Balancing What We Give to Jewish and Non-Jewish Communal Organizations. Ori, you're first.
Right. I was initiated to transcendental meditation, from now on TM in short, in my late 20s. And my TM practice allowed me to experience rest and silence and spacious awareness. I intuitively knew then that this is going to bring fresh air to my life and perhaps begin my personal research in consciousness. This journey led me eventually to live in a team community over a decade, and in which I meditated 4 hours a day, in 2 sessions of 2 hours, twice a day, including sun salutation, pranayama, basic TM, advanced TM. And simultaneously, I also was a prominent member of Beth Shalom and the school director of our Jewish school. So the journey has brought me with some details over here, and now I'm a Jewish junior rabbi. So you can see that the motivation for doing this inquiry is very personal, as well as a question that does come up in my rabbinic life, and especially in Hashpa'ah. So the essence of my tshuva is paradigm shift, using integral theory and mainly the stages of development, and that's why you got the chart, to illuminate it in the context of integral halacha and my own knowledge and experience of both Judaism and transcendental meditation. The essence of the she'elah is TM Avodah Zarah. And can we combine both practices? Can we practice TM and be Jewish at the same time? 4 foundational principles. Number 1, in times of paradigm shifting, we are forced to examine the halachic process with an integral halachic approach to the questions of spiritual practice. We need to allow the halachic process to become the transcending principle which we use to integrate the past with its limitations into the present with its new perspective. We apply the halachic principle of Hora'at Sha'ah, meaning teaching of the hour, which by responding to the moment allows experiments to take place. And then we examine the effectiveness of the practice for the practitioner. So the traditional sources are considered, but they don't have the final say. Point 2. In the halachic process, we want to include the wisdom that has been working for us until now. For example, Rambam's definition for Avodah Zarah. We also want to transcend that which keeps us frozen in the old paradigms, such as the attitude of us versus them, by understanding them. Principle 3. We also must include what we inherited, because otherwise we, as people with shared values, get stuck with the shadow, like the excluding of the mystical by the Haskalah rationalism and its orthodox parallels, or the inability to discern what's basic and what serves what's basic. And principle number 4, in the analysis of the process for this tshuva, I relied mainly on integral theory for the understanding of paradigm shifting, including levels of development. These are the charts. And since Reb Zalman got much of this understanding, of his understanding on this specific topic from Ken Wilber, I think it's kosher. And Reb Daniel agreed with me. Now, although my tshuva focuses on TM here is really a straw man for all authentic advanced spiritual techniques. Since we are an organ in the body of Global Village, we now have access to world wisdom. And obviously we have openness to deep ecumenism. We now can update our filing system, using Reb Zalman language, with what enriches our core values without the fear of Avodah Zarah. And I quickly came to realize that the most important question is not if TM is Avodah Zarah, but rather, does TM contribute to the person, to the community, humanity? Can we learn from other spiritual techniques and transcend the differences, the othernesses, for the benefit of what they bring to our own practice? We know that Judaism is not an easy path. And we want to find a way to integrate what we have experienced, at least what I have experienced on my soul journey, my soul searching with Judaism's wisdom and antiquity. We want to expand the bounds of the holy and find the one present in each one of us, in the God field and in the field of all possibilities, a term that Maharishi coined. Reb Zalman said that as long as what we do in our spiritual searching is not in a dissonance with foundational core Jewish beliefs, then it serves us as a means to reach God. So what were the issues I grappled with before being able to come to my conclusion? A, I needed a clear understanding of what needs to be included and what needs to be transcended. In other words, how to deliver an integral perspective as the vehicle of halacha for paradigm shift. So a little background. Over the last 2 decades, Ken Wilber has become known for his perception, based on lots of research, that human development, individually and culturally, goes through levels of development. The message is that human consciousness evolves, and there is an overall pattern of human evolution. It is an ever-unfolding process, passing through specific stages and spiraling up in greater and greater evolutionary heights of increasing complexity, each new level transcending and including the levels that came before. Reb Zalman has been talking about us Jews being one organ in this integral system that is given to the same laws of including and transcending in our own evolution as one tradition among the great wisdoms in the world. And it needs to be part of this universal great unfolding of consciousness. So in the book Integral Halacha, Reb Zalman indicates that, and I quote, we need to transcend the social and historic in our designing of integral halacha for our time and bring in the transpersonal. In other words, Jewish renewal needs to include and transcend the lower stages of development, and you can pick at your chart, and reach an emergent integral system worldview, which is the color teal, which includes the transpersonal, brings in multiple perspectives, accepts natural hierarchy, accepts complexity of systems, but most importantly, experiences decreased layers or levels of fear. B, second point.
Decrease of fear.
Fear, yeah. F-E-A-R. Why? Because in the lower stages of development, individually and culturally, many times we function or we react out of fear. In my effort to include, I had to examine what the old system has to say about Avodah Zarah and in what context it was said. So I began with the Tanakh. And in the Tanakh, idolatry is called Avodat Elilim rather than Avodah Zarah, and is defined as the worship of idols, belief in multiple deities, the worship of animals or people. Tanakh is not interested in including the magical, which is the magenta color, with its rituals, in its world perspective. It fought tirelessly against them, but in reality, Avodat Elilim kept on being practiced until the destruction of the Second Temple. After the destruction, the rabbis, in their effort to ensure the survival of Judaism, changed the focus from Avodat Elilim to Avodah Zarah. And Zarah, means the stranger, the other, the foreign. They created an entire system of law meant to keep Jews away from non-Jews. Now, this lifted the concept from lower stages of consciousness to the traditional ethnocentric worldview, which is amber. And most importantly, it achieved a very clear boundary between us and them. And this insight really needs to be reevaluated in time of paradigm shifting. In the post-Talmudic period, the discussion centered on whether Islam and Christianity were idolatrous religions. And the principles they used for a religion to be exempt from the definition of Avodah Zarah was if it accepted the divine authority of the Torah. For the Eastern religions, obviously this didn't apply, so by all Jewish authorities they were considered idolatrous. In the rational, modern worldview, all the way to post-Holocaust, there was a breaking out of the halacha and the beginning of mixing with others. Haskalah rationalism and its orthodox parallels excluded the mystical altogether and replaced it with a new kind of Avodah Zarah, like science, Zionism, capitalism, or on the other extreme, halacha as the supreme law, masoret, fetishism. You remember Al Green talked about that in his presentation. So you name it. At the same time, in the great yeshivot, a thicker fence was built around the Torah, and it became less even about Avodah Zarah and more about Jewish particularity as a value in and of itself, which narrowed the perspective even further and froze it really in the traditional ethnocentric view. So I want to take us back 2 steps and talk about Rambam a little bit and a little bit about Hasidism, obviously. So in Mishneh Torah, הלכות עבודה זרה, עיקר הציווי בעבודה זרה שלא לעבוד אחד מן הברואים. The main thing about idol worshipping is not to worship one of God's creations instead or even together with God. In the Guide to the Perplexed, it is idolatry to believe that God has attributes. Rambam challenges us to separate from our notions and and attributes that we give God, and says that when we are done negating all of these adjectives that we give God, only then we will begin to be able to know God. Which is a very similar notion to the Sanskrit neti neti. Not this, not this. Yeah? It's a Vedanta meditative practice, helping a person to understand the nature of Brahman by understanding who is not Brahman. While one of Hasidism's great achievement was to bring us closer to God, it also created the role of the Rebbe, the Tzaddik, who functioned like a guru and seemed for people on the outside as a mediator. We know that the Besht used to say God is all and all is God. And for the rationalists, this was misunderstood as pantheistic doctrine. For Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, pride was considered idolatry. But the most really interesting teaching I found with Meir Shiloach in his interpretation, wow, she showed me the watch. Anyway, I'll read you what Meir Shiloach said and maybe still another moment. He said something really amazing. A person should not rely only on the rules of the Torah, but look to God in every detail of action and in every time to listen to God's will. This he should be more careful about than all the rules of the Torah. I will skip, but I also explored what rabbis in Israel say about all of that, and I found some scary stuff. And of course, it's important to see what TM said for itself. And TM, as we know, is a technique for quieting the mind, and it prides itself that people of all religions can practice it without contradiction. We know it's a religion. And in fact, people report that it actually enhances the practice. In conclusion, I was able to interpret Torah for Avodah Zarah in a way that supports a new understanding based on the evolutionary process of consciousness. I included what the halachic tradition reveals, and because of the unique perspective of our time and the need for a new understanding, I applied the principles of integral halacha to form a new ruling appropriate to this moment. Needless to say that the ruling of this tshuva is that TM is not Avodah Zarah, and my person who asked the question can, if she wants, to practice TM alongside her Judaism. The future calls us to realize that we must reframe and transform the way we view our relationship to our tradition and to the other. And here in Jewish Renewal, we look at halacha as an ongoing process, an open process. And as such, it must serve as a vehicle for progress, as a sacred conveyor belt, if you will. Thank you.
Rabbi Bella and Candace Sheliak Zibor face a cross in a rented church space.
I don't have a boom stand, so let's. Thank you so much. Sorry to walk in a second or two late. I was here very early, except I was there very early. And you were all extremely late. Not one of you was in there with me. Thank you for indulging me in this. And I am the questioner and the responder. There wasn't anyone who brought me this question, but it was a very sincere question. I didn't just make up a question. At the time that I wrote the Teshuvah, I was serving in a small community in Northern California, in Sonoma. And we had the Bima set up. We were sharing a church space, and it was a wonderful group. We were actually renting. It was their church. We were renting it from them, the United Church of Christ, First Congregational Church. And the bima was set up in such a way that if you were sitting in my shul, you were well in shul. But from my perspective, I was looking at a giant stained glass window that said, they remembered the words of our Lord Jesus. It had a cross and a crown. And the quote was lovely. The quote was, "It is better to give than to receive." But it was a pretty large piece of iconography, and I come from an extremely Orthodox background, which might have made it a little bit more of a button for me, from a European refugee family. And so facing them was difficult, and the difficulty was not as much theological for me as it was the distraction factor. It was really the distraction factor, which I'm not I think I knew that all along. But I posed it as the question was, are there sources in halacha or perspective in halacha that can support me in continuing to lead the davening in this setting? So I was looking for the yes answer. I mean, that's the answer I wanted, but I really was asking to a rabbi, and I was looking for legitimate sources that could give me that. But I was looking at it from the perspective of integral halacha. I wasn't, I was going to Borough Park and looking for a yes answer.
Good luck with that.
A little bit reasonable. Basically, my mission was to glean. I looked at some very, given my yeshiva background, I looked at a lot of Tanakh and codes and Midrash and Agadah. I looked at a lot of sources, also some modern ones, but I really had a mission to take from them what I think is the mission not only of integral halacha, but in my mind was the mission of halacha altogether, which was it was written with a nod to more than a nod to the zeitgeist, but that was the stuff that could be, that's halacha, but that was timeless was the kavanah. That the keva was something that has always, we've moved, so the keva has moved. Time has moved, the keva has moved. But kavanah, that's, the intention has always been the intention. Okay, so, in other words, I found by page 16, it took me, that the question itself, or at least my relationship to it, had shifted. And that the most narrow reading of the question, though, I still had to answer, because that was the question. So that was a very specific distraction, and that was the cross. And I also very briefly felt like I needed to acknowledge that there were bigger questions about whether we belong davening in a shul anyway.
In a church.
In a church, sorry. I thought we belonged davening in a shul. That was that. So, but whether or not we should be in a church in the first place, and that was addressed, by the Rishonim, and way past that. And then I looked at the conservative from 1974, it's 82. Anyway, I went through it because it needed to be in there, but that was already addressed. So I really kept it, I hope, specific to that particular thing, because shared church synagogue buildings, they exist, and they are. What it broke down to, what it unfolded into, were four basic things. Tefillah, what's with that? Kavanah, distractions, and the Shaliach Tzibor in general. Sorry about that. Okay, so the first thing that happened, and one more thing. Because it wasn't really distinct, you can't break those things apart distinctly. So I didn't put it in those, I more or less, there were things that related to each of those things, and I just let it flow. So whatever opened up in those sources. The first thing was, Kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. Our first connection was really through action. And that's how we do a lot. Mitzvot were about action. You get into Shmot and Vayikra, very detailed. Action. How do you do it? Very specific. How do you do it? Very specific. Not so much about intention, but about how it gets done. And as we shifted over into prayer service, the rabbis told us every single detail. What time, what text, how do you face, how do you bow. Every single thing was very specific. Now we started to talk about kavanah too, and this, I have some, I'm not going to read you all sources unless they happen to pop up, but if you need them, they're here. Kavanah also had two very distinct perspectives on that. There's halachic kavanah, and then there's spiritual kavanah. Halachic kavanah refers to intent more than intention, if I can cut a fine line. Intent is whether you act with the purpose of being yotzei, fulfilling the mitzvah. So many Rishonim felt that performance of an obligatory action is enough, as long as you didn't do by accident. But others, the halacha really goes that you have to have the intent to really perform, not spiritually, but you mean that I'm going to do this right now. It's not just that I did it, I really intend to do it. But in the first explicit directions we have, it's about getting it done. Specifically with the primary focus being on Shema and Shemona Esrei. Okay? So suddenly we get now to spiritual intention. And we get a quote that says, this is really interesting, it's from Eli Wiesel, and he's quoting some Talmudic Hasidic masters that aren't enumerated, with a quote that says, whoever so much as blinks without kavanah is not human. Yeah, right? So, wait, I'm moving papers around, give me a second. You ponder that while I try to put my paper in order. Okay. So, rendering that kind of kavanah as intention or focus or purpose or sincerity or concentration is fine. So, but the halachic conclusion appears to be that mitzvot need some kind of intent to fulfill one's obligation. And if one doesn't have to have the most basic intent, he doesn't fulfill the mitzvah. Now we got to talk about the deepest intention of Kabbalah. Beyond the limited requisite of intent, it seems to be noted, I'm not going to go all footnotes, you can ask me really. It's noted that for 3 key mitzvot in the Torah, tzitzit, tefillin, and sukkah, you have to have a kavanah of the significance. What do those 3 things mean? So there are places where the significance really goes. And I've got all these different kind of beautiful sources. We could be here, this could be a workshop, really. And I'm going to spare you if you want to break out, and I'll give you more of these things. I've got an extensive quote. Sammy Barth writes beautifully about this stuff, about intention. There's a quote that says, how you intend during Shema Yisrael, you have to, on the first part, you have to intend on, concentrate on the oneness, the second part on Adonai being our God, concentrating with fear and awe, and Shema is compared to all sorts of things. Rambam said, any prayer said without concentration is not a prayer. Why is the tefillah of the heart? This is beautiful. The custom is to place one's hands over his face while not reading the first pasuk, so he should not gaze at any something which might distract him from having proper concentration. Many of us are very fond of this wonderful notion that if we just come inside ourselves, we can find this beautiful piece of dveikus. We can be so connected to God by just shifting our kavanah. It's good, and some people are masters at it. Some people, if the person behind them is coughing, it's hard. Or if there's a smell, or if there's a sound, or somebody's too close, they're pushing this. I don't know what it is. It's hard. There are many wonderful things in our traditions where they agree with that, and they give us some instructions. Here's a nice quote that says, you know, the prerequisite is the negation of distractions. And I perked up my ears. Yeah, negation of distractions. I'm not supposed to have to be able to do this by myself. I got to get the distractions out of here. Simply means that the place of prayer is physically clean and that there are no overwhelming distractions. That's from Dov Ber Pinson in Prayer Service of the Heart. You know, it's nice things. Then they give you a nice list of things that I never heard of. Like if you drop a siddur in the middle of prayer, or you drop a sefer in the middle of prayer, if it's distracting you, I was told, leave everything. Yeah, you're doing the Shemona Esrei, you're not allowed to move your feet. If a robber comes, you can't run away. If a snake is on you, you got to finish your tefillah first. You love that stuff in second grade. A snake is on me, I can't move. Who are these people? I got to go to public school. So, but there are things here, you know, if it's distracting, basically all these did, if a child comes, but basically the theme was, if it's distracting you, do the minimal thing you have to do, but get rid of it. If it's distracting you, because we are distractible people. The phone rings, the door comes, and then, whoever is preoccupied with an anxious state, a nervous state, doesn't feel well, don't daven. Don't daven. The Mishnah Torah, Sefer Ahava, Kriyat Shema, 4:1. One who is preoccupied and is in anxious state regarding a religious duty is exempt from all commandments, including Kriyat Shema. I should have gotten in my car and got home, because I was very anxious about this religious duty. There are many texts that seem to suggest the primacy of kavanah over obligation, and we can go on and on about those. However, now there's a whole section on how you do direct your own kavanah, and I got into so much trouble. Like everything else, Jewish question, many, many answers, and they talk about the mitzvot that are told us after Shema. They give us directions. V'ahavta, you should do this, this, and this. It tells you how you should love. We're in control of our own love, our own emotions. We're supposed to be able to know how to do that. Well, they tell us how. They give us a mantra. Write them down, put them everywhere you see them, tell them to your children, talk about them all day long. Train yourself. Anyway, it goes on. And Baal Shem Tov gives us instructions and all of this. Then there's a whole section which I did do, which I won't go into now, on who qualifies as a Shaliach Tzibor, because maybe I shouldn't be a Shaliach Tzibor in the first place. There solves the problem. The only part that I will tell you, because there's a lot of, first of all, not a woman. Then there are a lot of ridiculous things about what your physical condition needs to be, which really do. You can't have a blemish, you can't be blind, you can't be this, you can't be that, all things that I think that we have worked through and aren't really relevant to this. Because I wasn't deciding whether I or not was fit to be a Shaliach Tzibor. It's a different response. This was about the condition that I was looking at. But I thought it was important to just, yes, because there is response on it, and because I was trying to determine whether I should be their Shaliach Tzibor, I just gave it a nod. The only thing that I did think was important is this notion of a person's emissary being like themselves. Because if I am going to daven for them and I am distracted, does it matter? It matters if I am their emissary. It doesn't matter if it's bothering me, as long as I'm doing my job for them. If I am transmitting their energy and gathering it and being their shaliach, what do I got there on the time?
You got 2 minutes, 12 seconds.
Perfect. So I saw some sources that said things like the Shatz is the interceder on behalf of the congregation, as was the Kohen who brought the sacrifices. There's a quote that says in Masechet Brachot, one who prays Yamidah makes an error, it's a bad sign for him. And if it's a Shatz, it's a bad sign for everyone who appointed him. Because a person's emissary is like oneself, and on in that vein. The Shatz should never be distracted. Shatz should never feel anger toward anyone in the kahal. There are other sources, though, that seem to indicate that as long as you have a nice voice, just as long as you have a nice voice, that it doesn't really matter. So it goes. This way, that way, this way, that way. And thankfully, as with anything else, when you finally need to stop, you can find something that rests comfortably either way, that a person should really figure it out for themselves. That kind of thing. So I'll get to my conclusion, if I can find it in this pile of papers. This was my entire tshuva that I just sort of highlighted things. So, there we go. The very end. So, I'll tell you the truth, because I like you, that I didn't read the teshuva after I submitted it. And when I was talking about the teshuva the other day, I said, well, I'm going to read it, but I can tell you right now that the very 3 last pages, I just wrote what I knew they wanted me to say. So I knew I needed to end it, and I know what a renewal tshuva is supposed to sound like, so I wrote the last 3 pages as a renewal tshuva. Really, and I was kind of being funny, but I kind of really on some level thought that's what I did, and I thought I knew I was going to do that from the very beginning, and I just reread it, and I thought, no, that was actually my answer. It was actually my answer. I went through the integral halacha process, and I found the right answer. Well, the right answer for me, and since I was the questioner and the answer, maybe it was a little easier because I know my own heart, but truly I think the process worked. And it really excited me. It really excited me. I was like, oh, I actually did it. It was nice. So here's what happened. I came up with the quote that really spoke to me, which was, Rahmana liba bai, God wants my heart. So, and I really began to grasp the potential of a true Schatz after I did it for 20 years, and this was my 32nd year. I was a pretty good chazan after the first 10 years. And I was a good teacher and a pretty good congregational leader, and I kept getting better. And after I came to my first Kala in 2001 and found a new way of davening, it woke up my heart, I think. I really did. And I hadn't really sung Zmiros in that way since I was a kid, and it really did change things. And I did think originally it was about the cross, and it wasn't. And it was not about ramifications of davening in a church. And, I knew all about that. I think what was more telling was the 4 foundational subjects that I broke it down to without even really thinking about it. Tefillah, distraction, kavanah, and Shaliach Tzibor. Thank you. Ooh, you like this. In his tshuva regarding a woman breastfeeding in synagogue, Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson wrote, the issue here, it seems to me, is one of distraction. Balancing values. Involvement versus distraction is the work of any halachic ruling. The issue for me, obviously, was one of distraction as well, in the deepest sense. It's quite clear from our text, as well as common sense, there is no one who is capable of absolute and unbroken concentration. And nor is there any place free of something that might divert your attention. We're all expected to drift for a couple of minutes, and we can't snap it back. On the bima, my kavanah always has layers. For the most part, I'm up there alone, and I'm in charge of holding the container. I'm already distracted. There's missing candles, there's no matches, somebody forgot to pour the wine, somebody came in late, and I'm trying to make them feel welcome, my guitar's out of tune, I'm always distracted. Always. The yahrzeit list, I'm the rabbi, I'm the gabbai, I'm the dishwasher. It's definitely a different flavor of kavanah than what I had being a member of a kahal or sitting alone and letting someone else. But I realized it's a conscious intentionality, which was the definition of kavanah that I didn't find anywhere. And I've developed it over many, many, many years where I can stand in one place. I watched Shuli last night step from one place to another, and I realized I can have a foot in both places. I really can. And it's a total connect for me. And I may be doing things that are all part of my avodat shalom. The Kosovo Rebbe's description of the Schatz as a pipeline is an image I've often used, and the distractions that are inherent in my job don't block that channel. If anything, they draw me closer to my kahal. Maybe I can move the beam a little bit so I'm looking a little different way. But I really understand that you should love, that that's the one I grabbed onto. It really teaches we have within us a means to control and direct, at least to some extent, what's going on and where we're putting our love and our attention and our focus. And, the emissary of the kahal, when the members of the kahal are looking at me, it doesn't matter what I'm looking at. They're looking at me, they're looking at the bima, they're seeing a rabbi, they're seeing a bima, and that's what counts. So in the words of the best, whatever rises up in me and whatever thoughts or distractions, I can just recognize what comes up, and without judgment, and I can recognize it comes from God, and then I can lift it back up for me and my kahal.
Thank you. And finally, Rabbi Richard Backer, who is offering us, considering our tzedakah obligations, balancing what we give to Jewish and non-Jewish institutions. You know this.
What? Hear you.
Is that better?
Yes.
I mentioned that I will be talking about public education, but no snakes.
You're mumbling. Snake. Get it.
I have a chaplain's voice. So the question that informs my topic is from a congregant who states that he is committed to allocating a portion of his income for a maaser every year to a private school trust that provides funding for his son's public elementary school, in addition to monies he allocates to Jewish causes. He asks whether or not he is permitted to allocate a portion of his maaser for the funding of public education, education that benefits Jewish and non-Jewish students. My answer: One of the primary issues raised here is whether halacha permits the distribution of maaser monies to causes that do not directly benefit the poor and which do not directly benefit the Jewish community. As such, we will examine the leniency in halacha commentary relative to making such distributions beyond the needs of the Jewish community, and also a re-examination of how we define community and needy. As there are no specific responsa on point, we must look collectively to the manner in which maaser was reinterpreted in Jewish texts, commentary, and responsa, leading us to reasonably address the question posed and sensitive to the various paradigm shifts in the last century that reflect the integration of the Jewish diaspora into modern democratic societies in which the well-being of the whole community, Jew and non-Jew, are so intimately interconnected. Let's examine the following points. First, while the distribution of maaser kesafim, the tithing of income, to the needy may fulfill both one's obligations of tzedakah to the needy and their obligation of maaser, maaser funds are more elastic and amorphous and can also be used based upon diverse opinions for a variety of mitzvot that may not technically qualify as tzedakah. While traditionally tzedakah is limited halachically to donations to the poor, the broader mitzvah of gemilut chesed, bestowing of loving kindness, may be viewed as the basis for the use of maaser to fulfill these more lenient mitzvot. Here, gemilut chesed represents a Torah mitzvah that can be achieved through a broad set of actions, including financial contributions. Second, a difference is made between charity in the narrower sense of meeting the needs of poor people, hereinafter called primary charity, and charity in a wider sense, hereinafter called secondary charity. It should be noted that many commentators permit the use of maaser for other mitzvot when the means to fulfill such are lacking elsewhere. For example, commentary provides that a more broad distribution of tzedakah avoids marginalizing those who fall through the cracks. As R. Green writes, the needy who receive tzedakah have also come to be defined as the educationally, emotionally, and spiritually hungry, as well as those who literally cry out for bread. Even though most authorities allow the use of maaser for secondary charities, the major aim of maaser is for primary charities, and therefore the use of secondary charities should be occasional rather than regular, and a person should not devote a whole year's maaser money to secondary charities. Third, Jewish texts and commentary provide explicit references to the mitzvot of offering support to the Jew and non-Jew in our community, acknowledging that the use of maaser for causes that include non-Jewish beneficiaries is consistent with halacha. The Torah in Leviticus demands that you shall have one standard for stranger and citizen alike, for I am the Lord your God. And no less than 36 times the Torah warns Jews not to wrong a stranger. In the time of the temple, 70 offerings invoke God's aid for each of the 70 nations of the world as atonement for their sins and a prayer for their well-being, universal peace and harmony between them. The Babylonian Talmud in Gittin 61 states, we support non-Jews with poor Jews. We visit sick non-Jews along with the sick Jews, and we bury non-Jews just as we bury Jews because of the ways of peace. And in Teseptus and Hengenate 4 asks, why did the Creator form all life from a single ancestor? And the reply is that the families of mankind shall not lord one over the other, with the claim of being sprung from superior stock, that all men, saints and sinners alike, may recognize their common kinship in the collective human family. In regards to tithing distributions and to tzedakah, one response even maintains that one may deduct charitable donations to non-Jews from his maaser obligation. Also, Ramban provides, in regards to charity, a resident alien is to be treated as a Jew as we are obligated to sustain them, the non-Jews amongst us. Fourth, the rabbinic doctrine of Kiddush Hashem demanding that Jews act always to sanctify God's name and in effort God's reputation, is a critical concept in Jewish thought and application in our everyday lives, as evidenced by Jewish deeds reflected in the extraordinarily and disproportionate Jewish involvement in universal social causes. This principle and obligation is certainly served by our actions and our contributions, which by means of tzedakah or maaser seeks to achieve harmony and unity through peace, as exemplified in the text. To support their non-Jewish poor together with the Jewish poor is for the sake of the ways of shalom. Also, mipnei darchei shalom is one of the rationales given for actions promoting peaceful interactions by Jews and non-Jews. Here we can choose to view the halachic response to the Jewish status in the diaspora as reflective of a pragmatic approach to life outside of the sovereign Jewish state. Mishnah Gittin 5.8 lists various halachot whose rationale is given as mipnei darchei shalom, so as to avoid quarrels and contention, which encourage behaviors towards non-Jews that will circumvent conflict that might place Jews in a vulnerable position. In Tosefta Gittin 3.13 it is written, a city that has Jews and non-Jews, the communal tzedakah organizers collect from Jews and non-Jews for the sake of the ways of peace, and support poor non-Jews along with poor Jews for the sake of the ways of peace. Another rabbinical term, mipnei tikkun ha'olam, for the sake of tikkun, repairing this world, according to Jacobs, forbids practices that may lead to negative consequences or to cause the breakdown of an entire system. If we apply this principle to maaser distributions, we may conclude that limitations of maaser and tzedakah to within former familial and Jewish community confines may lead to negative consequences to our society as a whole. Fifth, in supporting the use of maaser monies for broader community charities, we base our response from a more universal perspective. The structure of Jewish society has changed from when Jewish communities were independent and self-governing to our current modern society, where the Jewish community is integrated into a larger or more heterogeneous community. The changes in definition of community in the Jewish world reflect a continued obligation to provide for our own, but also provide for those in a wider community. Jewish textual principles provide that seeking the peace of the city or country in which we live would seem to require us to be good and responsible citizens. As Freundel writes, citizenship obligations such as taxes, voting and jury duty, etc., are activities that we should willingly participate in, both out of gratitude for what our country has done for us and because it sanctifies God's name when we and Jews acted upstanding in appropriate manners. The prophets also emphasize the importance of seeking peaceful existence in the diaspora. Jeremiah proclaims, to seek the peace of the city to which I have exiled you, and pray on its behalf to God, for in its peace you shall have peace. And the Talmud provides, let the interests of the place in which you dwell be your own. The allegiance to the country of residence is also seen as an appropriate approach to maintaining social order. In Pirkei Avot it states, Rabbi Chanina, deputy of the Kohanim, said, pray for the welfare of the kingdom, for were it not for that, men would swallow each other alive. We recognize, as did Reb Zalman, that every religion, every path is a vital organ of the planet, and that we recognize that we are all responsible for each other, and that the fulfillment and the health of the larger organism is dependent upon the integrated functioning of its constituent parts. Reflective of this, according to one midrash, the Torah was originally revealed in the desert and not in the land of Israel, in order to suggest its teachings were meant for all mankind and not for particular people exclusively. As Art Green also writes that every human being is in the image of God is Judaism's most basic moral truth. A person cannot be expected to discover the image of God within himself or herself as long as he or she is hungry, or as long as he or she is homeless or degraded by poverty, addictions, or the seemingly overwhelming burdens of everyday life. Our task has to be to lessen and lighten those burdens, as ways of helping all to see the radiant presence that surrounds us. Through the allocation of Maaser monies to support the operation of public schools, we seek to sustain an essential community institution that has historically served to overcome poverty, nourish democratic ideals, and provide for the stability of our entire community. The expanding definition of community, which has grown beyond tribal boundaries, entails a reprioritizing of our Maaser allocations to benefit our Jewish community and to a more universal recipient. 6, the proposed Maaser distribution to the congregant is consistent with the priorities established by Maimonides' ladder, which provides that the highest degree of tzedakah is giving that allows those to become economically self-sufficient, thereby helping them to dispense with the aid of others. Examples of this would be teaching someone a trade, empowering them to make their own living and not to be dependent on the charity of others. By helping others to help themselves through the funding of public education, we look, for example, to Rashi's commentary on Leviticus. And you hold your fellow. Do not let your fellow slip down until they fall completely, for then it will be difficult to raise them. Rather, strengthen your fellow as they begin to fall. Poskim quote from earlier sources that in the community where not all parents are able to afford tuition for their children, the obligation falls on the community members in accordance with their capacity to contribute. In the funding of public education, we critically achieve the principles of lo ta'amod and lo tuchal v'chitalem, as we do not stand idly by nor turn away in the face of a failing public education system, and choose instead to pursue peace and justice by empowering our broader community to achieve civil integration and economic self-dependency through a public education system that functions effectively and efficiently. 7th, quality public education is fundamental to the preservation of separation of church and state, an issue that American Jews must vigilantly protect. In a culture without well-funded public education, education will be dominated by wealthy private schools and religious-based parochial schools. Free public education is offered with access to all of its citizens in a secular environment devoid of secular religious prerequisites, select religious prerequisites, and training. The importance of maintaining such a free and secular public education system is crucial to the wholeness of our democracy. Finally, 8th, Jewish commentators reinforced the Talmudic principles of the importance of education. Rambam taught that teaching is not just the responsibility of parents, but of anyone who has the ability to teach. That is a commandment on each and every wise person to teach every student, even though they are not their children, since the students that one teaches are called one's children. The siphoning off of students and monies from public education to privileged private schools, the viability and demographic diversity of our public schools is at risk. The American public school system serves to integrate students from diverse social, cultural, and economic backgrounds, where a diverse student body lives and works together in a shared educational setting, promoting mutual respect and understanding of our diverse social cultures. By supporting public education, the Jewish community strengthens the social contract that empowers the entire population, economically, politically, and socially, and therefore strengthens the nation we live in for the benefit of all, including the Jewish community itself. In summary, based upon these various principles of law and reflective of an ongoing paradigm shift, we conclude, based on this tshuva presented, that Maaser may be distributed to secondary recipients after the relative needs of the Jewish community are met. This conclusion is based upon the view that halacha must be allowed to evolve to coincide with such changing universal realities, underpinned by Jewish principles, acknowledging that a shift from a myopic, tribal perspective to one that is universal in nature is a critical shift in Jewish thought that serves the well-being of the Jewish community and our society as a whole.
So I want to thank all three of the panelists for their time and their thoughtful contributions to our body of work, our way of thinking, and of course to all of us here today. According to our schedule, the breakout sessions start now, so if you're going to do a bio break, do it really quickly.